and councillors and executive team. Welcome, everybody. Here we are, Tuesday the 30th of June 2020. Please be aware this meeting is being live streamed and the video will be available publicly on YouTube. Members, could you please remember to speak clearly into your microphones, and if I could ask everybody to turn your phones either off or to silent for the duration of the meeting. Thank you very much. Calling for apologies, we have one apology from Councillor Heidi Hughes. Are there any more? I don't. Councillor Morris? And Councillor Hollis. He's an apology?
Yes.
Right. And Councillor Hollis. For lateness?
Lateness for Councillor Morris.
Oh, for Morris, okay. And Councillor Hollis is. All right, thank you. If I could just have a mover and a seconder to accept those apologies in that form. Thank you, Tina. Thank you, Dawn. All those in favour, please say aye. Opposed and carried. Thank you very much. So, the public forum. Delwyn, can I welcome you? Thank you very much on behalf of the BOP Badminton Association and Zane. Thanks very much for coming from Sport BOP. You have 10 minutes to speak, including question time. So welcome, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Morning everybody, thank you very much for having me here, and there's a few of you that know me quite well because I've been here, I've lost count actually, about 6 or 7 times with regards to our badminton facility that we want to build in Tauranga and the land that we're asking for. So just a little bit of a background. I first came here in 2008 and we had our submission plan approved by Tauranga City Council. We worked with the council to identify suitable land. When we completed the consultation with the council, the land identified was Soper Reserve. On the 8th of November 2010, we got a letter in principle approving the allocation of land. Subsequently, the council decided that they'd like to sell it, so it was taken away from us. We contacted what was then the Tauranga City Venues Limited for consideration for land at Bay Park, which is now the Trustpower Arena. And we worked through some drawings there as well at Truman Lane. Then we were approached by the Polytech and we looked at a joint venture with the Polytech. So again, we did some concept plans and there, and then the merger happened between the Rotorua, the Wairiki and the Bay of Plenty Polytech, and so all progress with that was halted. In 2017, we were told that Soper Reserve was available again, and we did another submission in 2018 with regards to that, and out of that meeting it came that Soper Reserve we couldn't have, but they said Tatua Reserve was available and that we could have that reserve. But in the same meeting they said, could we look at Bay Park again? So it's been a very long drawn out process. I've had meetings with Gary Dawson prior to that submission in 2018, and he was very supportive of us with regards to having a piece of land to build a badminton hall. Zane was there in that meeting I had with him. He agreed that we didn't really fit into the current network, and you'll see by the pictures that I've given you, this is these are pictures of badminton hall in North Harbour. In Auckland there's 9 badminton halls. There's a heap of badminton halls all around the country, and Tauranga, being the 5th largest city in the country, doesn't have one at all. We've got no dedicated space, and we're fighting all the time with other sports to get access, with schools to get access, and obviously you can see the colours that we have in our current facilities don't help us either, because you'll see the shuttle, with the current colour of our facilities, that shuttle is really hard to see. So we've been working really hard with council staff, with Sport Bay of Plenty. We were working with Bay Venues, had the support of them. As soon as we got can you go and look at Bay Park again, everything basically halted. They dragged their feet. We we wanted to have a look at different pieces of land. They came up with one site that they thought was really good, but they'd like to build the building and then talk to us about leasing it out again. And for us, we want to be able to develop and grow our sports and actually generate an income as well so we can be sustainable. All the other associations around the country have their own facilities and they're bringing in their own income and they're not so reliant on gaming, funding and other grants. And that's what we would like to be. We've worked with Table Tennis and Parafed, who are another two organisations in Bay of Plenty or in Tauranga that struggle to get access to facilities. They require some specific things themselves. They would like to be able to leave some table tennis tables up. Parafed need better storage for wheelchairs and better access around the facilities. And we can provide that if we can build something that is going to fit for them. And they're really keen to work with us, those two organisations. We have worked with Bowls as well. They quite like a nice, warm, low ceiling environment, whereas ours is really large. It's 12 metre high that we're after. But it's really frustrating, you know, we're kind of going from pillar to post and we're not getting anywhere. And it seems to me that your CCO is dictating what's happening on council land for the ratepayers' land at this stage. We haven't got costs and stuff done. We can't even start a feasibility study until we actually have some land earmarked. And that's what I'm asking. We've got growth in our area. It won't just be the home for Tauranga Badminton, or the clubs in Tauranga, though there are 4 that would move there. It would be the home for Bay of Plenty Badminton. So we would attract ties for national events and stuff here as well. So what I'm asking you to do is to, today, allocate me one piece of land. You've said it's either this one or going to be this one, and I just want one. I don't want both, I want one. And I just want to be able to move ahead because I'm really frustrated. It's been 12 years. I think that's about it. Any questions?
Thanks very much, Dylan. Zane, did you want to speak now and we can take questions together in a clump? Or?
Yeah, I guess I'm more here from a spaces and places perspective and for any questions around that, I'm happy to answer questions.
Sure, thank you very much. Councillors, Councillor Morris.
Thank you, Mayor. Hey, thank you for coming in this morning. Do you have a preference in terms of the Bay Park site or Tatawa Reserve?
I just want one. It doesn't really matter to me. But to be honest, the roading structure and stuff that you have around Bay Park is most likely more conducive to people getting in and out of the area than what Newton Road is. So to me, it makes more sense.
Barry.
Hi, Delwyn. Nice to see you again, although not so nice, perhaps, given the circumstances. You do understand, though, that your requirement, your request, really, to have your own building and be on your own land does make it problematic for us to find a space for you. Not all sports get that opportunity, so we're trying to provide what we can, but that you can't budge on that requirement.
Being what it's more for us, we see that we don't fit into a multi-purpose system very well. As you can see, the colours and stuff don't fit very well. It makes it very hard, and we're up against basketball and volleyball and those that need different lighting to what we have. And the issue is that they're running out of space in that as well. We just had a forum last night for the indoor user forum with Bay Venues, and they're going, if you could get you that, then you can free up 4 other venues 4 nights a week, plus schools that we're currently trying to get in as well. So it kind of has a bit of a win-win situation. It's just that we don't fit. And I think that the places and spaces stuff actually acknowledges that we don't fit. And the meeting I had with the Visitor Solutions and the guy from Sport New Zealand when we had the meeting, was it last year while they're doing this review, they said they agreed that we don't fit.
Yeah, I guess I can add a bit of context further around that in the sense that the current indoor court network isn't conducive to badminton. And I think if you look at those pitches in terms of low-hanging lights, you can imagine a basketball flying through the air at one of those lights isn't going to end very well. And when you look at the spaces and places approach in terms of multi-purpose, shared, co-location, I guess that's exactly why Darwin's opened this discussion with Parafed Bay of Plenty and Table Tennis Bay of Plenty, so that we can maximise this potential facility across different organisations. And it's not a dedicated badminton facility; it's a multi-purpose facility, catering for, again, some other sports as well.
Just supplementary, if I can. I mean, I thought we had it solved last year when we were looking at SOPA, basically, and it did seem like it fitted on SOPA. But as far as BBL is concerned and Bay Park, it's not that you couldn't have a facility that met your requirements, it's that you would have to be, like all the other users there, paying fees to go there and so on, and that's something you won't consider.
It's the fact that we are always tied, and there's not enough room as it is in the network for the people. I talked to basketball last night, and they could run there every night. And that's the thing. We would like to be able to generate an income for our sport, and I think that's important. When we first came here, we have said that you had quite a lot of land at that point that we did the review. There was 26 sites. I was amazed. I thought there must only be 2 or 3, but there was 26, and we narrowed it down to it was a really robust consultation process that we went through, and it's just hard.
Go on.
Yeah, thanks very much, Darwin and Zane. You mentioned there were 4 or 5 badminton clubs around this area. Is that correct? So, given there would be only one central facility, what's the likelihood that those 4 or 5 would remain unique, or would they sort of consolidate into one larger club?
No, they'd still be unique clubs. They just run on different evenings and during the day. And then it also gives us opportunities because we hire a lot of halls at the moment for our junior rep programs, our senior rep programs, and that's where we struggle, because we can't always get times that fit everybody. And we can't always get into schools. We had one club that used to be based at Bethlehem College, and now they can't use that facility, and they were there for 10 years. So it's just getting harder and harder. I also run a club that works out of Tauranga Boys College, but for our Bay of Plenty badminton rep trainings and stuff, I can get their facility sometimes on Sunday afternoons, but every second year they hire that facility out to Tarnish Frocks and Divas. So then I'm struggling again to find space for us, and we're growing. That's the thing. We've had in secondary school badminton had a 7% increase in 2 years, and we're the only sport that has increased. We're now in the top 5 sports played across all age groups within New Zealand, and in top 10 sports played in secondary schools, and we're growing. It's the second most popular played sport in the world, behind soccer, and it's hugely popular, obviously, with Asian demographic and everything as well. As I said, in Auckland there's 9 badminton halls, and they don't have enough capacity there.
Just in terms of co-locating clubs into one facility, that's, I guess, deemed best practice at the moment, and the reason for that is it lessens the burden on the clubs in terms of facility management, fundraising, etc., and actually supports administrative sort of and operational tasks of clubs being run through one centralised facility. So it, in a way, in a wider context, it's actually supporting the sustainability of the clubs, centralising them all into one facility, and actually allowing those volunteers that are giving up their time to put their energy purely into their sport, into the delivery of the sport, and not looking for every other dollar and where it's coming from and hoping that they can exist next season, sort of thing. So it's, in terms of that approach, I guess that's the whole Spaces and Places push moving forward, is trying to best resource through facilities our clubs as much as we can.
And Zane and Darwin, people will travel to one centralised club here in the Western Bay of Plenty. You believe that's the case?
Yes, most definitely, because I've got clubs in Tauranga who have been putting money away in a fund for this, and they have been since I started this, and the issue is, you know, they get moved out when there's school programs and other bits and pieces and stuff on as well. So, you know, obviously Ames Games for us has grown considerably as well. So we have, you know, 250 plus kids come to that to play, which is basically not a lot in comparison to football, but it's a lot for badminton. We played 1,165 matches last year in 5 days. It's a big undertaking, but last year I had 8 junior rep teams to nationals, and the only other association that has the same number is Auckland. All the rest have less.
And the facility that you're proposing will have the capacity for this growth. If it continues at, say, 7% per annum, you'll still have the ability to grow within the amount of games that you would play in that particular building?
I think so. At the moment we only run on 10 courts. We would like to have 12, and ideally, if we could, we'd like to have an area that is maybe a bit more specific for the para and the table tennis, but we could have that part as multi-sport with more badminton courts on it. So ideally it could be a 17-court facility, and we can then host New Zealand secondary schools, because we need at least 16 courts to do that.
Right, and sorry, just to be clear on the New Zealand secondary schools opportunity, if we had the right facility here in Tauranga, you think you'd be able to pitch and win?
Yep,
for that?
definitely.
Yep, okay.
Definitely. And if I can have an international height, I would look to try and have an international tournament here in Tauranga too. Hamilton has an international. Auckland, we have an international there, and I would like to try and have an international here in Tauranga.
Very good, thank you, Zane.
It just, I guess that in terms of a spaces and places process, once a piece of land's allocated, then we can go on with the detailed feasibility study, and that's where a lot of this sort of information will get really worked through and figure out exactly what's going to work and what's going to be sustainable and where the future opportunities lie, and I guarantee that there would be more than just what Darwin's mentioned.
Just for the council to understand the scope of both national and international tournaments, I think is really germane to this. So thank you for those answers. Councillors, anything more?
I'm on the board for Badminton New Zealand as well, by the way. So I have quite a good overview of what's happening nationally in our sport.
Very good, Dylan. Thank you very much. Well, appreciate you both coming in, and understand it's been a lengthy and somewhat frustrating process for you. So hopefully we can help out.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Council, acceptance of late items. I don't believe there are any. Confidential business to be transferred into the open. I don't believe there is any. There's no change to the order of business that I'm aware of. Confirmation of the minutes, nil. Declaration of conflicts of interest. Anything new that we should be aware of? Deputations, presentations, petitions and recommendations from other committees, nil. Which leads us on to 10.1, which is the multi-purpose badminton facility. We have the staff here, I believe. Robin, Megan, Mark. Great, thank you very much. That was in Stella. Thanks, team. We're in your very capable hands. Thank you.
Yes, good morning. It's Robin here from Strategy. Just introducing this report. So this report came about as part of the Tauranga Reserve Management Plan deliberations. We received a submission from Bay of Plenty Badminton in regards to looking for land that was suitable. So the resolution that was passed at that time as part of those deliberations asked us to consider Bay Park again, and if that was not suitable, we would, Tatua was approved for that facility. So staff undertook a process with Bay Venues and Bot Badminton to look at suitability and availability of Bay Park. The recommendation today is that Bay Park is a strategic asset for the city, and we do need to do some further planning in this area, so therefore we'd recommend that Tatua was approved. Okay, happy to answer any questions on that.
Thank you. Councillors, any questions? Councillor Morris.
Thank you, Mayor. Good morning. In terms of Site 4 on the Bay Park site, talks about that's Bill. That's the one up top right-hand corner for the visually challenged. How much would a geotechnical investigation cost? I haven't done many of those recently.
They vary greatly. 15,000 possibly.
Supplementary, if I may, through you, Chair. Thank you. Difficult question, but how have you found working with Bay Venues on this proposal? Sorry, you're right there, Councillor Baldock. You're shaking your head. I think as governance, we need to know honestly how the interface between our Tauranga City Council staff is and the Bay Venues Board. I think it's in the public interest. Councillor Baldock.
So as staff, we meet with the various Bay Venues staff on a regular basis. We get on well. We met with them yesterday, for example. We have a good relationship and we talk everything through. We don't always have the same opinion, but that's quite normal.
I just further to that through the chair. I think the change in leadership over the last couple of months has allowed us to turn a corner in terms of the working relationship between council and Bay Venues. Not that it was bad in any way, shape or form in the past, but the current acting CEO is incredibly proactive and interested in working very, very closely with council to support great community outcomes. So the last month has been refreshing.
Thank you. Councillor Morris.
Thank you. Final supplementary from me. This paper, was this essentially the recommendations in it developed under the previous regime or since the change there in terms of the leadership?
My understanding is a bit of both, really. This has been under discussion for quite a long time, 12 years. So it's been, quite a few CEOs have passed through while we've been having this conversation. In terms of recently, the issues are the same, regardless of who's steering the ship there.
Councillor Cloud.
Yeah, thanks very much. Can someone just advise us what's involved in reclassification of a portion of Tatua Reserve from the local purpose to recreation reserve? What's involved with that process? How difficult is it?
So that would involve surveying off a piece of the land and then outline plan being lodged with Land Information New Zealand.
So it doesn't require the Minister's approval, Minister of Environment?
No, we have delegated authority for this. Yeah.
No, it's not reserve revocation, it's just a change in purpose.
Councillor Baldock, followed by Councillor Granger.
So we see the recommendation today, but a year ago, staff's strong recommendation was SOPA Reserve, as it was in 2010 and all the way through. So what has changed in 12 months? Is it simply the council decision 12 months ago that takes SOPA off, or is it still the best location? And should the new councillors, since the elections last year, be brought up to speed with all that's behind those recommendations?
Through the chair, I think absolutely acknowledge that SOPA Reserve could still work for this facility. I think the crux of the decision that we came to last time revolved around the use of the site for events, specifically concerts. We had some plans that illustrated that both activities could coexist on that site. I guess there was just a level of nervousness about the detail and the energy that had gone into developing those plans, and whether, when push came to shove and you actually started building it, there could genuinely be those two uses using the same space. There was just a level of nervousness, I guess, that one would restrict the other. Not to say that through design we couldn't solve that problem, but in the end, I think after quite a lot of internal debate over an extended period of time, we landed on the fact that putting it in Tatua had less impacts on the other likely users of the space rather than SOPA.
But there are impacts at Tatua with community buildings, men's shed, others that want to be there. We now know that, and this is just a recent development with the Amanu Bowling Club, a rather large piece of land, not very far away. Should we have a look at that in order to make the best decision at the right time without delaying things any more than they need to? But now that we know that that land could be coming available, should we have a look at it?
I think a decision to use the bowling club is obviously yours to make. It's not something we've discussed specifically yet because we haven't quite wrapped up arrangements with the bowling club, but I think that we would view that land as quite strategic as an asset for the city, and to just, give it away at the first cab off the rank without looking at it at a more strategic level in terms of how it fits into the network of community amenity across the city. I think that would warrant, some investigation, which obviously we'll do. But in terms of getting a decision for badminton today, that would hold the process up.
And Gareth, a supplementary to that, given Delwyn's growth forecast 7% per year and the opportunity to secure national and international tournaments, I would have thought parking would be a real concern. And a consideration that should be taken into account with the thinking around this. And I guess the volume of parking required for those big tournaments would be best positioned at Bay Park. Would that be correct?
Parking is something that will be considered as part of the feasibility study as to the user groups and how big the facility ends up. The concern around Golf Road and a badminton facility would actually be the height and the design of the building. When the assessment of all facilities and all potential land was undertaken, quite a substantial amount of residential, including Simpson Reserve, which is quite a large reserve, was discounted because of the residential nature and the design of building. It has no windows and it is quite an industrial building. So we would,
Just Newton Road being industrial also means that after hours there tends to be quite a lot of parks available, so it actually lends itself to quite useful after hour use.
Councillor Granger.
Yeah, thank you, Gareth. I'm just coming back to site one up there, or option one. You've got it. To me, when I looked at that site, it seemed obvious being close to the car parking facilities over there. Just give us a little bit more clarity. I see you mentioned here in regards to the current and future uses that made that particular site unsuitable for development. Can you touch a little bit more on that?
So site one is the area where the stormwater team have a resource consent to take the tailings that they take from the stormwater ponds across the city, and so once they do the soil testing, if the stormwater pond is deemed to need a clean, the soil or spoil that's taken from the stormwater ponds goes to site one, and if it has high level of contaminants, it goes somewhere else. But so that land is not compressed in any way. It's not. You'd have to do a lot of work there, and we'd also have to seek a resource consent process to put those tailings somewhere else as well.
I was just thinking maybe just like anything else, you have to do a geotech report, etc., to see if it's suitable. But I just when I looked at it, I just thought that possibly would be suitable.
Thank you. Councillor Robson.
Happy to move the recommendation, Your Worship.
Thank you for that. I'm just wondering, before that, Justine, do you have any views on this in respect to Bay Park, given it's been discussed at all? It would be good to hear from you if you do.
Look, it would be unfortunate if the elite members or the badminton community were under the impression that Bay Venues wasn't supportive of a new badminton facility being built in Tauranga. That's certainly not the case. The issue really here is one of lack of strategic planning for the location of the facility. council staff have worked really hard to try and find a location to solve a problem. But with the greatest of respect, the lateness of consideration of any land at Bay Park led to an ad hoc analysis that wasn't proper, full and complete, which is why Bay Venues has got a strong view on this. Our view in summary is that option 5 makes sense as a location for the extension of a community sport facility. What council decide to use that for in terms of which sport is totally up to council and should be guided by the work that's been done last year around community sport, community needs assessment and all the work that Mark and his team do around demand and supply for different community sports. But our view is, the extension of the arena, which is in the location of option 5, makes sense from a strategic perspective. It's co-locating this facility with an existing facility. There's existing parking there. We have a cafe there. We have staff there. Whether or not council how they want to use that and for which sport is really up to council. To put option 4 on the table, however, without a full and proper analysis of the impacts that would have not just on BVL, but on the city, is short-sighted and ad hoc. What I mean by the impacts are that, as Delwyn rightly pointed out, the badminton club want to be able to generate their own revenue. Bay Venues is expected to generate its own revenue. We have really strong expectations around that from council. And one of the ways we do that is to use the land available to us for a commercial purpose, the profit from which goes towards subsidising the community facilities. Delwyn's right, last night we did undertake a user forum with our users. And whilst we were there delivering what I perceived to be the good news, that our price increases were halted for a year because of COVID-19 and we're only going up by CPI, we met some quite strong resistance to just a CPI increase. The impact of putting a building in the location of option 4 would be to remove a significant ability for BVL to generate revenue on that space. Now, by doing that, we would have to increase the user prices across the network because how we subsidise that is by our commercial activity. So if we're constrained from our commercial activities on the site, we will have no option but to increase the user pays for the facilities across the site because we can't subsidise them. Either that or coming back to council and increasing the subsidies significantly and markedly. So our view is that without the proper analysis of that impact, and if that's a decision that council decides to go ahead with, yes, increase the subsidy to Bay Venues so they can keep the entry prices to the facilities accessible. That's a political decision. That's up to the shareholder. But all we're suggesting is that you don't have the analysis that you would need to undertake to make that decision today. You don't know how much you would have to put those prices up. We haven't done that work. So in the absence of that, then we're suggesting that option 5 makes sense from a BVL perspective in terms of expanding the arena for community sport. But if, in the words of the badminton community, it really doesn't matter which piece of land we get, then I'd suggest that Bay Park probably could be put to a more co-shared, multi-purpose use in terms of extending the arena.
Justine, that's very appreciated. Thank you for that overview. Councillor Arbery.
Do you have sort of a rough order of magnitude estimate of how much that 6,000 square metres might earn per year?
Are you talking about the option 4 site?
Yes.
So that is the land that we use for access and egress to all of our large concerts. So it's not just Bay Dreams, but any other concert that occurs on that field if you're bringing 30,000 people on site, they can't all squeeze in down the narrow lane to the right-hand side. We open up the field itself and take down the fence, and that's where the people come in and out. And we need to do that from a health and safety perspective. We wouldn't be able to get 30,000 people onto that site without utilising option 4.
Councillor Baldock. Any other questions of Justine? Justine, thank you very much. We have a mover and a seconder. Councillor Baldock.
If I can just ask for clarification on, since the mover has moved the recommendations there, I'm just not sure that takes us anywhere, because it seems to leave things open. It just acknowledges that Bay Park is a suitable site, but also approves Tatua Reserve, and that seems to me a little bit in the same space as we've been for a long time. Still no decision made.
So
How long would that strategic work take, and where would we go from there, if we could answer that?
If I can just speak to it, the reason why Resolution A is there is because if you look at paragraph 8, the direction or the requirement of staff in the previous council resolution was that we needed to undertake work to determine whether or not Bay Park was a readily available or suitable site. So that was what the instruction was from the council. The staff have done the work, and we are saying it is a readily available or suitable site, but we're saying it is not the most suitable or the most strategically sensible site, and that's so the Resolution A is a direct response to the previous resolution of council, and then the Resolution B is effectively saying, but even so, given that, the Tatua Reserve is the one that we're approving to proceed with, and so that's why it was there, because we had to implement the council resolution, and we were not comfortable with recommending that site because it strategically wasn't the right site in our view, but we had to address the resolution that had been passed by council.
So for me, the and should be replaced with a but, because that makes it clear. We are finishing one, we're making a decision today and so on. I don't know if that suits the mover, but that's just for me a little confusing.
Well, I think the words acknowledge at the beginning of A and approves at the beginning of B do kind of, I think, highlight where the direction's going, which is that we are today, again, approving Tatua Reserve as the most appropriate location. Councillor Robson, would you like to speak to this?
Yeah,
At this stage?
most of the argument's been said, so I'll reserve.
Councillor Arbery.
Yeah, briefly, I think it would be good if we can get this on a site separate to the Bay Venues site in terms of particularly Site 5. It would make sense if that's an expansion of particularly netball and basketball facilities in my limited view. And yeah, that we maintain that flexibility there and use up other land, and that will also free up, the sooner we can get this built, or the badminton clubs can get this built, the sooner that frees up other facilities. And if people are willing to fund community sports facilities, then we shouldn't hinder that. I think we should make a decision so that they can move forward with a bit of confidence.
Very good, thank you. Anyone else? Councillor Cloud.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you to staff for going through the exercise that was requested of you. It seems to me like Tatua Reserve, is the logical choice. It takes it away from the complications of Bay Park. It allows Bay Park to continue to grow in a much more strategic fashion. And so, yeah, looking forward to seeing the feasibility study. I'm assuming that we will see that, will we, Delwyn, at some point? Or, yep, looking forward to seeing that feasibility study and progressing to the next stage. So, well done. And congratulations for your perseverance too, Delwyn. Okay.
Thank you. Councillor Morris.
Thank you, Mayor. I think what the discussion has brought out is that there is a need for strategic direction around the entire Bay Park site, and how that is used in the future, and that work needs to be done, and it needs to be done with council in the future. I think it would be incredibly helpful to Bay Venues if council had a strategic view in terms of spaces, places and facilities around our city, and that would provide some clarity to Bay Venues around council's priorities, what it's willing to trade off, what it's not willing to trade off. I think that would be useful. So, yeah, we can't operate in a vacuum. We need to operate strategically, and at the right time, once the annual plan and indeed working up the LTP is underway, we probably need to have a conversation with Bay Venues that's strategic and not, ad hoc.
Thank you. Before Councillor Robson speaks, can I just thank the team for the work that you've done, Zane and Delwyn, for your, excuse me, your valuable and what appears to be long-term input into this. There is no doubt that Tauranga lacks amenity facilities of this sort, and as you quite rightly said, Delwyn, we're the 5th largest city and we lack so many things. So I agree with Councillor Clout. Thank you for your perseverance on this very important matter. Councillor Robson. Councillor Bulldog.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'll echo the thanks to the staff and the patience of Delwyn and the badminton clubs. I support the motion, but I am rather betwixt and between, because with the knowledge of expansion, the opportunities that exist, I just wonder if we're not, shooting for the less or the least best option, really, for the sake of time. But the feasibility will help tease that out, and I think we may find it back here again once the feasibility is done, because there may be some limitations on that site as we get into the details, as well as the costs of building the building. But parking there is on-street parking. I think at SOPA we did have an option of some shared parking on SOPA Reserve that would serve some of the events there as well. I can't recall specifically, but certainly at Bay Park there's oodles of parking. But if we're talking about national events and even international events, we do want the facility to be in the right place. And but I think you've waited long enough, and we need to give you a decision today so you can begin this feasibility work. We'll have to see where it ends up as we come back to ultimately the LTP and so on.
Thank you. Councillor Robson.
Yeah, look, it's, as I said when I moved the motion, I think most of it's been said. There are lessons to learn from this, but I'm comfortable, very comfortable, that the decisions made at this council table have been the right decisions. I think the decision not to go with SOPA was absolutely the right decision. I think the decision to open a conversation with BVL and allow them to make some input, I think the decision today to effectively recognise the input of BVL and give them, acknowledge, if you like, their mana over that site to some extent, and the decision to advance this after 10 years of patience on behalf of, more than that for the sport, but 10 years since the 8th of the 11th, 2010, is the right decision. And I commend it to everyone. I think this is genuinely a win for badminton. I think it's a win for BVL. I think it's a win for this city. And that's what we're here for. I commend it to my colleagues.
Thank you, Councillor Robson. Good to have some wins. On that basis, can I just put the motion to you, Council? All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? And carried. Thank you very much. And thanks again to the staff and Delwyn and Zane for coming in this morning. Thank you. Which leads us to 10.2, the Spring Street car parking building. Paul and Dave, if you're here, thank you very much. Paul, are you?
Just briefly introduce the paper. So the Spring Street car parking building has been looked at for seismic reasons. It's not part of, in terms of the time frame of the requirement to do that, but following the earthquakes in Christchurch and Kaikoura and updated guidance that came out in November 2018, this car park has been looked at, and there are a number of or some initial work that's being identified to be done, which I'll leave to Dave and Paul to talk further about, plus a secondary piece of work around a detailed seismic assessment, which will give us a better position in terms of that building, in terms of subsequent work that may be required. So I'll hand over to Paul and Dave to talk through in more detail.
Thank you, Paul, and good morning, Mayor, councillors. This brief presentation provides you with the background to the seismic assessment process that is underway and a summary of what has been found to date and the next steps. It's a summary of the key points from the paper in the agenda. The backstory, as Paul has indicated, that this building was constructed in the mid-1990s, designed and constructed at a time which, with the new earthquake-prone building regulations that came in 2017, doesn't require an assessment, but because it features long-span precast flooring, which has been established following the Canterbury and Kaikoura earthquakes as having potential vulnerabilities, Council elected to have an assessment undertaken, and we've been working through this progressively with Becca through a series of assessments, focusing initially on the more obvious areas of weakness that could lead to a low rating for the building. In terms of the findings thus far, the good news is that the primary structure that comprises the structural walls are considered likely to rate between 50 and 67% of new building standard, subject, however, to a closer look at the foundations. The ground isn't great in this area, and while that was taken into account in the original building design, we now know more about the potential for the ground to liquefy and the impacts of that, and this is a key area requiring further examination. The other good news in terms of the original concern is that the seating of the precast flooring units is likely to rate above 34% of new building standard, but because of the complex geometry of the ramps, it now requires a detailed analysis to determine the overall floor score, and it's possible that it may come in less than 34% NBS, and this is all part of the liquefaction understanding, and Becca have already made a recommendation that wherever that further assessment turns out, additional support brackets is recommended to each floor unit throughout the building, as is taking place in a number of buildings around New Zealand from a precautionary perspective. A local issue has been picked up by Becca in terms of the connection between the northeast or the block walls on the northeast corner of the building and with the floor slabs, and that appears to be rating less than 34% NBS, and so the recommendation to strengthen that via steel posts and brackets, relatively straightforward, has been estimated to cost $141,000. There's another complication introduced to the assessment of this building by its connection with an adjacent building in Grey Street. The ramp support has been confirmed as being satisfactory, but in the way the assessment process works through, the rating of the interconnected building plays into the rating of, in this case, the parent, much larger building, and that adjacent building currently has a rating of 40% NBS. The implications of that will be worked through further in the detailed seismic assessment to follow. So in terms of the next steps, and these reports came in just earlier this month, and so the decision has been made, approval has been given to Becca to complete the overall detailed seismic assessment, including further geotechnical investigation. That is likely to take of the order of 3 further months. And also, in the meantime, approval has been given to retrofit the connection of the northeastern block walls, that current area of potential weakness, for the cost mentioned previously, given that this work is physically independent of any other strengthening of the floor system that may be found necessary from the detailed seismic assessment. Decisions in relation to strengthening the floor slab connections, as previously mentioned, will be made once the whole story is established from the detailed seismic assessment. This is a work in progress process. There's an associated question that this work always gives rise to, and that's the question of what owners should do in terms of continued occupancy when faced with a low rating. And final slide to share some of the key messages that are relevant here, and in terms of what a low percent NBS rating does and doesn't mean, and the intent of this whole seismic assessment process is to establish, is there a heightened risk, and to identify and convey the need for mitigation work to be undertaken, preferably sooner than later when issues are identified. If the building is then found to be earthquake prone through the regulatory process, there is a linkage with defined statutory timeframes, which are more than a decade here in the medium seismic area that Tauranga is located in. It's important to appreciate what, however, a low percent NBS rating is not intended to do. It doesn't convey that the building is currently dangerous. It doesn't convey that there is a collapse risk in a moderate earthquake. And from those 2 points, it's not intended to stop people from accessing and occupying buildings before a mitigation plan and timeframes can be developed. Percent NBS itself is a very blunt device that is being used. It does enable the comparison between buildings, but it is not a predictor of performance of a particular building in a given earthquake. I look forward to any questions.
Thanks, Dave. Paul, did you want to add? The building not being dangerous is germane to the immediacy, and that's what you've established. Is that correct? Councillors, any questions? Councillor Clout.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Dave. Your very last statement was quite intriguing. You said that the percentage NBS is not a predictor of performance in an earthquake. That surprises me. Can you just elaborate on that a little bit more, please?
That does, it's counterintuitive for some people. The, again, percent NBS rating rates the building against the regional seismic hazard, the same criteria that a building is designed for, which is a range of seismic components, fault activity, and geotechnical considerations. How a particular earthquake affects a building, that depends so much on the nature of the earthquake, obviously, but how it comes from the source to the site, and I guess we continue to learn as a profession. In the Kaikoura earthquake, was a particularly surprising event in that it didn't trouble the most vulnerable buildings in Wellington, the unreinforced masonry buildings, but it really troubled the mid-rise multi-storey buildings. And again, to illustrate that, there were 700 earthquake-prone buildings at the time of the Kaikoura earthquake. Hardly any of them were damaged in that particular earthquake, and that's probably the best illustration of both the bluntness and the lack of prediction that is should be associated with a percent NBS rating.
Councillor Arbery.
I'm happy to move after questions are finished.
Thank you. Any other questions, councillors? Can I have a seconder to Councillor Arbery? Councillor Arbery, do you wish to speak to this now?
Yeah, briefly. So there's an element of this building that's below 34%, which we're going to spend about $140,000 to fix to bring that above that 34%. I think this process is quite robust, and I think it was quite proactive of the council to do this when legislatively we didn't have to. But at the same time, the investigation is still ongoing. We've only done an initial seismic assessment. We've got a detailed seismic assessment underway. So until we know the results of that, we can't really make any further decisions. And the engineers, they have a code of conduct, I suppose, or ethics that they work under. So they would tell us if this was a dangerous building, and at the moment it's not. So let's let the investigations finish and make decisions once we have all the information.
Thank you, Councillor Robson.
Reserve.
Any other comments?
Nothing to add. Thank you.
I'll put that to the vote then. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, abstentions, and carried. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Thank you for the work you've done. Much appreciated. This leads us to 10.3, City Centre Objectives and Decision-Making Timetable. Ross and Nigel, if I could welcome you to the desk, please. Thank you very much. Nigel, thanks for coming in today.
Good morning, everyone. I'll speak for a minute or two and then pass over to Nigel to make a couple of comments. The report asks you to endorse the development of a refreshed direction for the city centre and the development of a coordinated programme of potential actions to consider through the LTP. We're also keen to hear feedback on the indicative objectives and outputs table that's attached, and any views on content, process, consultation, and further input that you would seek as part of that process. We're assuming that there's a shared view that we want the city centre to be a success, but also that perhaps we're less clear or joined up on what success looks like, and perhaps even less so on what council's role is in that success. What's proposed is a process to establish answers to those questions, and to do that in partnership with key stakeholders, especially investor interests, who, alongside us, are the people who are actually going to affect change within the city centre. We're working closely with Priority One on this, and the Chief Executive and I went along to a session yesterday that Priority One facilitated to understand the current challenges and opportunities as developers see them. I'll ask Nigel in a minute to perhaps feed back on that session. We spoke to you back in March in an executive briefing session. We identified the need for a revised, succinct direction for the city centre that accounts for the emerging investment context and particularly the strategic context provided by the Urban Form and Transport Initiative and the Te Papa programme. Since then, we've had an initial go at producing a summary table of objectives, potential projects, outputs, targets, and outcomes that may be valid, and we invite your initial feedback on those. After that, we'd propose to develop a shared narrative, again working with Priority One and the development community, and then to produce a document that would be used both to guide the market and your own investment and enablement decisions. The report itself provides more detail and background as to the rationale, notes the continuing public interest in a successful city centre, and then sets out a timetable for dialogue and decisions, both in regard to that direction and also the various other streams of work in order to inform you and make sound decisions through the long-term plan process. Nigel, did you want to?
Thanks, Ross. Morena koutou. Look, so I'll just make a couple of points in regards to, I guess, what Ross talked about there in terms of council's role. and then I can add a little bit of colour to that developer meeting that we had yesterday. So really I only have 2 points in terms of council's roles. The first one is that if you're serious about the city centre being developed in the future, then a partnership approach is needed. So I think we've found so far that private developers can only shift the dial so far, and council can only shift the dial so far. So what I would urge is a moving together of both those interests to meet some objectives. And I think probably what we're seeing so far is it's a little kind of on different directions, and that's probably why you're getting the results that we have, and both parties need each other. So a partnership approach that is, I guess, collegial and respectful, and most importantly, constructive in terms of what we want to achieve, so some shared goals. The second part is that the signals that you send as a council are really, really important here. So you have a private sector who want to do stuff in the city centre, but they don't need to as well, right? They all have stuff elsewhere that they can do, and there's no imperative for them to do anything. So no one's in a difficult situation where they need you to help out here. What they do need is cues from the council about what the council's doing. So if you're serious, if you take the decision that, yeah, we're in the business of the Tauranga CBD being better, then you have to take some actions after that. The worst thing you could do is probably not do something. Say you're in and then not do something. That would be highly detrimental. So a good example of how that works is your office building, which I guess you're considering as part of the Devonport Road site. So what happens in that instance is every developer in Tauranga will say, we want the best tenant. That best tenant is council, because you have a long-term lease and you're stable and all of that stuff. And we're not going to develop anything until we know what council's doing. And I'm going to sit there and I'm going to wait, because I don't need to do anything. I'm just going to see what council's doing. So a delayed decision there simply means nothing else gets developed. Once you make a decision, it means they say, okay, we haven't got council, we're going to go and pursue other opportunities and get on with it. So that's the type of thinking that needs to go to that issue. It needs to go to this site here. It needs to go to the bus interchange, and car parking and all the rest of it. So Marty's got a few intersecting pieces of work which he might like to elaborate on, but the timeline Ross has outlined is good. September is what we're shooting for, and I guess what we'll be asking you to do is just make some decisions. Doesn't really matter which way they go. The important part is that you set direction that then the private sector can move off subsequently. So in terms of the work we've been doing with Ross and the team, we've mapped the entire city centre in terms of who owns what, how big it is, what the restrictions are, and most importantly what the development intentions are, because obviously different owners have different views. So that's completed, and that's actually really helpful for new developments happening. And now we're starting to get through developers, and Marty and Ross came to a meeting yesterday. Marty's got a few bruises after that. You tend to find pent-up frustration gets directed at him, so he did a great job. But what I guess I could summarise there is that the private developer community are actually really positive. So they're not down on the city centre at all. They're actually quite positive about it. They want to do stuff, and they want to do things in partnership. And what they need out of council is simply to make spaces that are good for people. So they're not really after any big grandiose buildings or anything like that. They're just saying, hey, look, we'll build the buildings, you make it a nice space for people. So you make it nice for green space, connections to walking and cycling, connections to the waterfront, and then the rest will flow after that. So what we'll do over the next couple of months is distill all of that. I'm not a big one for big lofty vision statements, so I prefer to get some really concrete things out in a pragmatic way that then help you make decisions in a better way. But I guess the key part to that is that partnership's really important, and signals via decisions are also really important. Thanks.
Thank you, Nigel and Ross. I'm happy to move this following discussion. Tina, I think you had your hand up, did you? Yeah, thank you. Any discussion? Kelvin.
Yeah, thanks very much, Nigel and Ross. Just talking about partnerships, do you think that we have shown our ability and willingness to partner through, for example, Durham Street and the University of Waikato, and also Elizabeth Street with farmers. So there's examples there of us partnering. Would you say those are good examples of our partnership?
Maybe is it something you'd parade out there? I mean, I think university, great in terms of partnership. There were probably some public comments that weren't directed in the most constructive way after that. So that is noticed, right? And same with Elizabeth Street, right? I'm not sure of the details there with farmers and the likes, but I think they would expect support, and consequently, if they didn't get reasonable support, probably sends the wrong messages to developers. So I think there's a little bit there, but you would expect that to be expanded on, and most importantly, you've got to have a good direction, right? All of this stuff looks really good as projects if you have the right direction that you can kind of hinge your story on. So currently we're probably in project mode rather than story mode, and it's not that hard to get to, but that's probably what we'd look for.
Thank you. I really appreciate the report, and I'm definitely excited to have the conversation and start working towards a more thriving CBD. I just have one question, and I understand that investors are key partners in getting this done, but around the strategy and developing a strategy for the city, are we also engaging with Mana Whenua as a partner in that strategic process?
We haven't done to date on this particular project. I guess one of the questions I'm asking of you is how broad you want that engagement to be. We have engaged extensively with Mana Whenua on previous exercises in relation to the city centre, and I personally think that would be appropriate. I guess the question is how and when, and certainly happy to accommodate your views on how and when that should happen.
Thank you. Councillors Morris, Baldock, followed by Councillor Arbery.
Thank you. One of those key stakeholders is obviously residents and consumers. So how do you propose we engage with residents and consumers around this strategy?
What we've proposed is a couple of options for kind of broader community engagement, including residents and consumers. You can either produce a document that you then consult on and use feedback on that to help form your views as to what you would like to do about it. The alternative, I guess, is to produce this document in partnership with the key investor stakeholders, use the existing information you have from the community as consumers and residents, and then pull those two things together and put your LTP together, and then consult with the community then. So those are the two options that I've essentially tried to articulate in the engagement section of the report. And again, I'm kind of keen to understand your position in regard to those things.
Yeah, just if I could just introduce the Chief Executive here, please, just for a sec. Thank you, mate.
Thank you, Worship. And Nigel, you alluded to the fact that there are multiple streams of work going on, and this stream that you're talking about is primarily the investment story, working with those that have the money, that have the land, or are able to construct the new types of developments that we want to see in the CBD, and creating the story around that. So sitting alongside that, and well, overarching that, we have the Te Papa Peninsula intensification process that we're going through at the moment, and obviously the CBD is part of that, albeit it doesn't have a strong presence in that work, and so this particular piece of work will feed into that. Also, there's the let's call it the shelved or latent heart of the city work that has gone on, that really just sits there in the background, and really what we're looking to do is to take the bits out of that and feed into the central city strategy, the relevant bits. Sitting alongside that, and we'll discuss this later this morning, is the civic precinct
master plan work. Likewise, there is the waterfront development strategy that dovetails into this as well. And then on top of that, you've got the Devonport Road conversation and process that we're going through at the moment. So this is a component part which really primarily focuses on the investors. And I think yesterday was the first time when I asked the question whether or not such a group had come together in such large numbers. I don't know that they had. And I think if you could take the benefits that we have seen come from the residential development forum that we have and apply that to the different type of developers that we were talking to yesterday, I think there's a very, very powerful group there who, in my view, typically operate independently, and yesterday I could just feel the power in the room of some consolidation and galvanisation of that group who, in my view, has got a very, very clear message to council, but it just hasn't been delivered in a consolidated fashion. I think we saw the start of something yesterday which will help us to work in partnership with the development community as opposed to individual developers. So.
Thanks very much, Marty. Councillor Baldock, followed by Councillor Arbery.
Well, that inspires another question I'll direct to the Chief Executive before one to Nigel if I can. But you said a very large group. I'd love to have been a fly on the wall to see the bruises inflicted actually, but what are we talking about there? 20, 30, how many?
Yeah, there would have been. Oh, Nigel, you did the catering.
We catered for, there was 15 and there were another 5 that couldn't make it, and that would represent all of the major players there. So that was 75% yesterday, and we'll get around the rest. All are keen to work with yourselves.
You mentioned that they're quite positive about the CBD still. Does that mean that they can invest and make a buck, or does that mean they'd like to see more investment because they've already got assets here?
So generally, they will have an asset here, but they don't need to do too much with it. So a good example would be over the road, right? So they'll only invest if it's viable to do so. And probably the biggest factors there are whether they can make a buck out of it, but probably more importantly, how risky is it? So they generally know their equation. What hurts them is risk, right? Am I going to be the first people in here? Will council kind of back me up in terms of having some decent stuff around? How long will it take for a consent? How easy is it? That type of thing.
Any other queries? Councillor Robson. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to the debate on this. Question, we've talked about, and it's been raised, where residents sat in this and where consumers. There is another group which I think we forget about, and that's actually people who already own substantial holdings in the city, but they're actually not developers. And I imagine, and I have a particular name in mind, that person I'm thinking of was not in the room on yesterday. I imagine they weren't catered for. I imagine they didn't even get an invite. And I'm really concerned that we've started in the wrong place here. So can I ask what provision is being made to include the views of people who are, unlike developers, who are, as Nigel said, don't have to do much to realise their dollar, but people who have already made significant commitments. So what work has been done or being anticipated to include current property owners, current business people, while the great and the good are making plans for their futures?
I don't know who you're referring to there, but our intention is to simply have the major parties in the room. So if this person or entity you're referring to needs to be there, then we're more than happy to do it. It's a collegial thing, John, so happy to include them. And we have mapped the entire city centre, so we do know kind of who's around, and obviously that won't include everyone. So we would probably try to get the major ones and the ones that can do things. But happy to talk afterwards about that, who you might want included. How much? I don't know how much of that you missed, actually. We're happy to include anyone. We're not precious about it, and we really just want the best outcome through having the major players there.
Councillor Kitty.
Thank you. So have we talked to the existing business owners in the CBD as well? We did make note that we were going to obviously talk to the community and what they're wanting for the CBD. Have we talked and got some analysis on the current business owners down there as well?
I haven't myself spoken to current business owners as opposed to land property owners and developers through this process. We are in regular communication with them, either indirectly through Downtown Tauranga or off the back of individual projects and programs that the Urban Spaces team run. So I'm confident that we can, I'm confident, first of all, that we generally understand their viewpoints, and secondly, that we have the mechanisms to understand their viewpoints in future as we take this project and this program of work forward.
Just supplementary, so what are their collective viewpoints?
I'm probably not the best person to speak to those. I don't know if...
Is that the collective viewpoint of the business owners? It's very, very sad. You only need to walk down Devonport Road and half the shops are empty. And the reality is more retail offering is going to leave the CBD. It's exactly what we spoke about yesterday. It's exactly what we heard from Downtown Tauranga last week when we met with them. And the offering outside the CBD just continues to get better and better at the demise of what is currently known as the Central Business District. I don't know that the AFTI work is going to necessarily revitalise the CBD. In fact, what it sees is significant growth in commercial, industrial and retail in remote communities that are connected. And so I guess what I sensed yesterday, it's time to rethink what actually this geographical area means to the Western Bay of Plenty. And if we think it's going to be occupied by large commercial premises, well, the reality is it won't happen anytime soon.
Councillor Morris.
Thank you. Question to the Chief Executive from his experience in Whakatane. Looking at the retail environment in the downtown Whakatane area, it's very different to looking at the retail environment outside here. But of course, Whakatane has that hub with the old mill there just outside of town. How, in your experience, why does that seem to work, but Tauranga doesn't?
Well, I think you only need to drive down Cameron Road and you have 5 kilometres of large box retail, commercial, retail, small industrial. And if you were to think about the businesses and the scale of the businesses that occupy the corridor, if they were to be condensed into a geographical area known as the CBD, I think we'd probably have a very thriving CBD. But ultimately, it's probably the longest, oh, no, I won't, it is one of the longest strip, retail, commercial, light industrial strips in New Zealand, I would have thought. Great South Road probably is another one, but even that I suggest that that the planning that allowed that years or decades ago has been at the demise of what I would call a thriving CBD. I'm not a planner, by the way, so just an observation.
Thanks, Marty. Councillor Robson.
Yeah, Another question, it's good to see the Chief Executive so involved in this conversation. It's actually quite critical, given the Chief Executive effectively is the person that authorises reports that come to us for our decision making, ultimately. With regard to that comment, does staff have a view on the role the city plan has had in the effective hollowing out of our CBD, and the role of the developers in the creation of that city plan?
So if I can respond to that. So the city plan, the principles and philosophy that sat behind it at the time were very much about market-led. So this city plan was effectively created back in the 90s, well before then, I think. And we have had many conversations with elected members over the years as to that philosophy, and it has changed somewhat. So the plan change, which was about non-residential and residential zones, was a first significant step to try to pull back, if you like, some of the business-related activity that was moving into what were effectively residential zones, but that's the most significant shift. That policy that was in place about market-led and enabling the market to go where it wanted to has left our city the way it is. And so we have that structure. In some ways, it's sort of helpful in having sort of different nodes around the city in terms of trying to provide access for people to retail and other activities in their neighbourhoods and not requiring people to move so much around the city. So it has benefits. If everybody in the city was trying to get to the CBD, would have even greater transportation problems than we've got. But the question is about what is the role of the CBD. It's probably more about a business and a cultural and an entertainment hub than a retail hub. One, because of the nature of retail as well, is changing a lot more to online. So we do need to look to the future and say, what does that mean? And we will be bringing a report to the July UFTED committee to start to have a conversation about the city plan review that needs to basically be pretty much complete by 2024. That work is starting now, and the council can start to set its policy direction through that process if it wishes to change effectively the land use form across the city.
Your Worship, yeah, I had a two-part question, and I thank Christine for the comprehensive and I believe accurate answer that the city plan was market-led. I asked what was the role of the developers in that. I'm happy to provide an answer in debate if staff are unwilling or uncomfortable to provide an answer of the role of developers in creating a market-led city plan. I'm happy to provide an answer in debate if staff are uncomfortable or unwilling to answer with regard to the role of the developers in creating a market-led city plan.
I'm happy to attempt an answer, and then you can answer your own question in debate if you wish. They simply developed what the city plan enabled them to do.
Yeah, just a question following up on Christine's answer, really. For many years, the CBD demise has been blamed on Bayfair, Tauriko, Bethlehem, why we've allowed that to happen. But isn't that consistent with the smart growth strategy of live, work and play, and the things that the Chief Executive is now raising, that it's actually the ribbon development along Cameron Road may have had more to do with the demise than those sub-regional areas? I'd like your comment on that.
It's probably a mixture of all of those things, I think. It is the ribbon development, it is those other centres, but it's also that the CBD itself hasn't had a lot of investment, so a lot of businesses also removed themselves from the CBD probably about 10 years ago and went to alternative locations, a number of those actually on Cameron Road, and that's why the plan change about, you know, trying to restrict that even further in some of those areas. Some of it is about the difficulty of building in the CPD, the earthquake-prone buildings in the CPD. Some of it is about the land holdings in the CPD, which I think Priority 1 have done some work on, a number of relatively small land lots that are hard to redevelop, and the nature of some of the investors in the CPD and why they hold those investments. And so it's a mix of all of those things, and I think each of them needs a different tool. And this plan that's going to look to be developed is trying to look at the investment part of it and the land holdings part of it and see if there's a way to bring that together to stimulate investment in the CBD, predominantly in the business sector. So I think it's hard to really identify which is the core driver.
Just a quick supplementary, if I may. Where would we be, given our congestion challenges, if those other centres hadn't developed and all roads led here for commercial development and for retail and so on? We would be in quite a mess.
Yes. So the public transport may be able to be more effective because you'll bring a lot more people into one location, but I think your congestion would be worse because we know we've got constrained corridors physically and we know we've only got 2 cross-harbour crossings. If you think about the Waikato in Hamilton, I think they've got something like 7 bridges across the river and I think they're building the 8th one, or 6 and moving to 7. We've only got 2 and they're both state highways and they're both, and one in particular is carrying a significant amount of port traffic. So to move people into and out of our CBD, given our isthmus and water, etc., is quite difficult. So if we had predominantly all of our retail in the CBD, I think that's going to create a whole series of other issues.
I'm sorry I missed my colleagues' Papamoa Plaza as well, which is pretty useful for the people that live out in the east, I think.
Yeah, so whilst we're talking about the city plan and its influence or its ability to influence decision making and investment, I advised the group yesterday that the city plan would be reviewed 23-24, and the sense was that they would be keen to see certainly the issue of how the CBD is managed brought forward. Now, I don't know what that looks like, and I haven't shared that with Christine, but that's perhaps something that we may be able to report back to council. And I did use the term, it would appear, with the development that has and investment that has gone on under the current plan, that essentially the horse had bolted. They didn't necessarily accept that and were keen to see, I guess, how it could be reined in.
Mr. Arbery.
Yeah, I think we're opening Pandora's box a bit, so I'm happy to move the recommendations when... oh, okay, sorry.
Well, questions before we move into the debate. Okay. Yeah. I'm going to reserve as the mover. Councillor Salisbury, did you want to, as the seconder, speak now? Councillor Morris.
Thank you, and I acknowledge that council officers were requesting feedback on the objectives within the attachment 1 of the paper, and so I'll use my speaking time to give some personal feedback from my perspective on those objectives, possibly turning the straw man and embellishing it and turning it into a bit of a scarecrow, but we'll see how we go. The first objective in terms of transport to and from the CBD, I think within that there's that tension between the different modes, and possibly we need to recognise the choices that people need to, their preferred modes, because some of those modes compete and some of the philosophies behind them compete as well. Actually we have people who within our city who would seek to constrain access to the CBD for the car mode, for the purposes of encouraging a Bucharest kind of bus system. So we need to kind of resolve that tension in some way, in a deliberate kind of fashion, between what people choose, what they should be doing because we think they should be doing that, and actually how do we get people into the CBD in a sustainable way. So that needs to be resolved in some regard. The second objective there in terms of new office accommodation and retail space, I think probably we need to look at a hierarchy there. Starter for 10, new accommodation, getting people into the CBD, and then 2, new office, and then 3, probably rather than new retail, maybe rationalising the retail that's already there, speaking to the Chief Executive's point about Cameron Road and that long strip up there. Can we rationalise the retail within the CBD? The third and fourth objectives basically look like museum and museum, so perhaps we can just have one objective covering that and your performance venues, stadiums, civic plaza, etc. And then I'd suggest perhaps having an objective around land use planning and the role that plays. It's a bit of a long game there, but the role of land use planning in terms of the CBD, forming up an objective in that regard. Maybe another objective in terms of residents and consumers, because of course without residents and consumers we can sort of create a Roman Forum down here in downtown Tauranga, where you've got monuments but people coming and looking at the monuments but nobody buying anything or living or doing anything like that. So I think a CBD does exist to serve its residents and it does exist to serve consumers. So possibly an objective around that to really engage those folks. And lastly, possibly an objective around advocacy and, fitting within that would be the role of those that advocate for the CBD, Downtown Tauranga's role, etc., like that. So that would be my feedback in terms of the objectives there. I think we probably need to broaden it, look at some of those trade-offs, look at some of those competing philosophies in terms of transport, try and resolve them as best as we can, and broaden out to some land use planning tools and actually what the role of the CBD is in terms of serving residents and consumers. That's important. So thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Arbery.
I think the motion in front of us is just to decide to develop a plan and have a look at what we've got and pull it together and have some objectives. So I don't think we need to develop that plan around this table now. So I'm happy to support it. I think developing a plan is a good idea.
Very practical. Thank you very much. Any Councillor Cloud.
Thank you. I'm often bemused with how people are so concerned about retail not being strong in the CBD, and in my view, this very much is the business, civic, cultural, commercial hub of the city, not necessarily the retail hub. And so I'm not so hung up on retail success in the CBD. That will come as a consequence of more people either working here or living in the CBD. So hence the need for us to go through this particular planning exercise to look at that broader scope of what the CBD actually means to Tauranga City. And so I'm very happy to support this next move. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? Councillor Robson.
Yes, speaking to the motion, I'm going to vote against the motion. I think Councillor Arbery's observations are correct. I think developing a plan and having some objectives is always good. However, who develops the plan and what the objectives are is actually critical. When you want to move forward, it's quite important to start with a clean sheet. And I'm minded of a comment from someone who's been in politics in the sub-region longer than I have, who said to me once that the developers have raped and pillaged your city for years. I look at our current income model and I notice it's extraordinarily business friendly, but the cost of that business friendly model is probably close to $1 billion, and that hasn't been available for the assets and amenities this community requires. I'm conscious of Councillor Clout's observation that it's about business, civic, cultural, commercial, but of course part of UFTI is it needs to be residential. And the very fact that he can list 4 and miss residential in 2020, given the importance of bringing people back to the CBD, concerns me somewhat. I believe the way we're approaching this topic, and I appreciate the good intent, but the way we're approaching this topic is wrong. Many in this council have talked about and certainly campaigned on engagement with our community, and I believe our CBD is an example of a place that at some level requires an element of co-design. The biggest funders of the CBD will be the residents of the city, directly and indirectly. In the businesses they choose to support, in the retail offerings they choose to support, in the professional services they choose to employ. Many of them will be employing the services of financial consultants to remortgage their houses, to pay the rates, to deliver the money that developers want us to spend so that developers can make money on the investments they've already made. I think this should have started with a workshop. I think the way we're going about this, certainly in the public domain, we've started slightly in the wrong place. And I'm not criticising anyone's intent here. But we have to look at where we've been and why we are where we are. And the city plan carries an enormous amount of burden for this. But let's be clear. The city plan is the responsibility of the people in this room. The councillors make the city plan. So what you see out there is, to paraphrase the ethos of another place, is an example of people who weren't good ancestors. For whatever reason, and I'm not criticising their intent, but for whatever reason, they didn't deliver us the inheritance that I think the people deserve, and I think we need to take lessons from that experience. Those who do not learn from history are doomed to repeat it. I would urge us to take pause. I would urge us to start by workshopping with our community and getting very, very clear what we're seeking to achieve here. I can't support the motion as it currently is. It's too introspective. I don't believe it acknowledges our history. And I make one last observation, and I do welcome the Chief Executive's engagement and involvement in the discussion. I think it's vitally important that the work that's done here is effectively, ultimately, the work of council, which is the councillors and what I lovingly call the machine. You can't rein in something that you never put reins on. Once the city plan's put in place, we don't get to pull the reins. The reins are, at best, occasionally applied through the Environment Court. The city plan review coming up will be critical to the future of the city. I think any attempt to preempt it or to fail to engage our community in it appropriately and properly grounded means that we will repeat history and we will be looked upon as not good ancestors. I urge people to pause and I urge us to think again. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Baldock.
Thank you, Mayor Temby. Look, first of all, I want to give my thanks to the Chief Executive for fronting yesterday's meeting and taking the bruises, which he doesn't deserve, really. Council has had a history of inflicting these things on ourselves, and I'll refer to the Aspen Reserve project that was going to go alongside a development there on that site, and it was cut in half, its budgets, on a whim, and is still unfinished. I'll talk about Wharf Street, which only passed with a 6-5 vote, very narrowly, after enormous amount of consultation with all those involved around Wharf Street, the businesses. They were begging us for it, yet we only managed to squeak it through, and then there are still murmurings about trying to stop it afterwards. Durham Street, in partnership with the university, which is a huge addition to our city, a campus in our city, and yet all of the rhetoric and all of the speeches made about the Durham Street development as our contribution to it. I'm not surprised if it didn't scare many developers from partnering with us. And the last one is Elizabeth Street, which passed again on a 6-5, but there have been a number of speeches in this chamber about trying to reverse that decision. And it's the reversals, I think, that are probably the most frightening. The Chief Executive, Priority 1, has today said that the signals we send are the most important. It's not the money we spend, it's the signals we send. And I think I've made that speech myself umpteen times while I've been in the chamber the last 5 years or so. And previously, before that, we continually send the wrong signals. And when we do manage to squeak a decision through on 6-5, there is still an undercurrent going on for ages about trying to overturn them. So it's not surprising that those who are investing their money in this city are a bit nervous about what we mean when we talk about partnership. I really hope we can. I hope this is a new beginning for building a partnership with the people who will help build the city and rebuild the CBD into what it can be. It has tremendous potential with the harbour, with the waterfront, with everything here. It's got huge potential. What I do know is that doing nothing is not going to fix the CBD. We have to have some courage to take steps and contribute to the revitalisation. Free parking will never solve it. It's just ridiculous to think that having free parking is going to suddenly bring everybody back into the CBD. Councillor Clout is right, and he may have momentarily missed residential, but I'm sure he understands it. I thought I heard it. Yeah, I thought I heard it. We have to have more people living here, working here, visiting here with the conference centre and so on. All these things which we have talked about for many years, but failed to actually, when it comes to the rub, to actually put our money where our mouth is. The reverse decisions are the worst, I think. Over time, the city plan has allowed development to occur in other places, and I think, as I referred to in my question, it's just as well we did, because we'd be having gridlock in here if we only focused on this area. But there are some mistakes that have been made, and I believe the city plan, if we approach it properly, the city plan review, as well as the Te Papa spatial plan and the plan changes coming with that, can take us forward in a very, very positive way and make it possible for developers to have the confidence to work with us in a partnership. The speech before mine was a very, very good description of what it means not to be a progressive, to always call for pauses, to always ask for a rethink, and yet accomplish almost nothing. We've had plans that weren't started by me before I came into council in 2016 about a museum, about a new library, about cultural centre, things like that, which were started by elected members back then, yet still have not been fulfilled. And I despair, actually, of this rethink right now of a master plan for Willow Street, because I don't think we're up to it. I think it needs to be taken out of our hands and to some of the people with experience in actually building things. None of us around this table can say we've done anything great architecturally or commercially that has any real evidence behind it. And I despair that we might just go through another plan. What we do need to do is get on with the getting our people back into one building, as the Chief Executive has called for, and making a decision around the civic administration building, so that that can have a part to play in energising some activity out there. But the redoing of a master plan, I think, is something we need to really think about, whether the people sitting around this table are capable of actually working together to bring that about. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Councillor Kitty, followed by Deputy Mayor Salisbury.
So I too want to acknowledge all the work that is obviously going into this, and am also aware of our residents' contribution and input into something like our CBD. I'm just wondering if I could put an amendment up to put the residents in there on recommendation A, agrees to produce a refreshed direction, objectives and priorities for the city centre in partnership with residents. If that could actually also be put in there as well, so that we can hear from them and acknowledge them and hear their input into this as well.
Let's clarify the purposes of the amendment. Are key stakeholders not deemed to be residents?
Just so that we can acknowledge that we will be engaging and working with the residents as well, so that the amendment can have in there residents in general, not just key stakeholders.
Can I ask Mr. Chairman, can I ask the mover of the amendment if she can clarify which residents? Residents of the CBD? Or?
Residents of Tauranga City
Okay,
in general.
so the whole population?
Yeah. Who will be using the CBD and wanting to engage with us, I would imagine.
We have an amendment, Council, proposed by Councillor Kitty, seconded by Councillor Morris. Councillor Morris, thank you.
Thank you. I agree. I think the wording, in partnership with residents and key stakeholders is better, because just in the discussion in the chamber and in response to questions, it seemed that perhaps the focus was a little bit too narrow. As residents are the ones that are the consumers and the ones in which the Central Business District serves, broadening that out to a little bit of a wider conversation would not hurt. In fact, I think it would be beneficial in the long run.
Thank you, Councillor Baldock, followed by Councillor Robson.
Yeah, I'll speak against the amendment because the amendment or the motion already says agrees to produce refreshed direction, objectives and priorities for the city centre in partnership with key stakeholders to inform Council's 2021-31 long-term plan. So as a part of informing our long-term plan, we consult with the residents of the city. To try and consult with the residents of the city now in order to inform the LTP, I think is misguided. I think what we need, the people we need to partnership with are the ones that have been discussed here this morning, those who are key stakeholders. It's not that they make all the decisions or that we make decisions then and ignore what the rest of the city want to say about it, but that is a process which will occur as we enter the long-term plan, which is the next big task on our agenda. And this is just a few words to make a few people happy, but it's not really addressing the process we need to go through methodically and consistently to get to an appropriate decision.
Thank you, Councillor Robson.
More than happy to support the amendment. I think making the residents explicit goes to the heart of the statements made by our Chief Executive regularly in public, that we intend to work with our community and do things with them, not to them. There is a misunderstanding about engagement. While LTP does require consultation with our community, and to a greater or lesser extent is done regularly in compliance with the requirements of the Local Government Act, the truth is we struggle to engage with our community and involve them at the right point of a lot of our, how can I put it, envisioning and project inception. And I think many of the projects that were listed in an earlier speech that had significant issues attached with them, part of those issues was a failure to engage with our community, to make promises to our community that were able to be kept. So I think specifying residents is a strong reminder of why we are here, which is to serve the people of this city first and foremost, the current and future residents of this city first and foremost. So more than happy to make that explicit, because I think sometimes the lack of the fact that it's made explicit means that it gets overlooked. Thank you for the amendment. I'm surprised that the mover and seconder didn't simply adopt it into the substantive motion.
Thank you. Councillor Cloud, followed by Councillor Arbery.
Yeah, I'm definitely inclined to support this, but before I do make a final decision, I'd be keen to know from staff, what is the extra process and extra cost of this wider residents consultation? Thank you.
So if you want to undertake genuine engagement with residents, it's quite an exercise which is going to have some cost. So I think what we would do if you pass this resolution is then we bring the annual plan report back with the deliberations. We'll put a section in there that says to give effect to this resolution, it would require X, and then that could be added on in terms of the costs in the draft in what will become the final annual plan. We'd have to go away and do some work on that. I can't give you a number off the top of my head, but we would flow through this into an additional budget for inclusion in the annual plan.
Yeah, look, I'm just conscious that we're consulting our community, our residents on the Te Papa Peninsula intensification spatial plan, that we will do similarly with the plan change that we're proposing to notify in September, that we will do likewise with the waterfront development strategy or vision, that we'll do the same with the civic precinct development. The focus of this piece of work was primarily around working with developers to try and create an investment story. That's not to say that the wider community can't necessarily be involved, but my sense is that, you know, for the first time yesterday, we met with those that have skin in the game, and that we would be looking to, over the next 5 to 10 to 15 years, to be investing millions of dollars, tens of millions of dollars into the CBD. I think, you know, there is the possibility that, you know, once we can consolidate our thinking with that group, then potentially we then could, if you like, share that story with the community in such a way as to receive feedback. But look, I'm just, perhaps if we could, this is a piece of work that essentially we've commissioned Priority 1 to do, to drive, primarily focused on the, let's call it the business development community, and it has a, you know, it's a niche piece of work that fits into a wider city centre Te Papa process as well. I just wanted Council to be aware of that that's what's going on at the moment. That's not to say that we can't include residents in the resolution.
Councillor Arbery.
Yeah, I think it's a tricky one. When I think about the homelessness or sub-regional homelessness strategy, obviously residents have, they care about that as well, but if we'd involved residents in coming up with that strategy, it probably would have fallen over because you would have too many voices, whereas you really needed the key players around the table. So I think this, when I think about this piece of work, to me it isn't a what's the vision for the city. To me this is a what are the barriers for the investment community to building buildings in our city or in our CBD at the moment. And I think if we throw those forums open to the public, then potentially we're going to see those investors not provide their input. So yeah, maybe we need to reword that so that it's specific to the work that Priority 1's doing. But yeah, I don't think we need to consult with the community on another bit of vision work when we're already consulting with them on that vision in a couple of other places. So at the moment I'd have to vote against this.
Thank you very much. Deputy Mayor Salisbury.
I would just like to add that I think that we have, in key stakeholders, I would agree that we have incorporated the community in there. And also I believe this won't be done in isolation. I think there is already recent engagement that's been done through the vital signs update, through the Te Papa work, that is already being informed by residents in the area. So I think at this early stage, I would say that key stakeholders covers what we need at this stage. So I also would be voting against the amendment.
Thank you very much. As I will be, in fact, you've taken exactly what I was going to say away, that the vital signs, I think, has given us, has informed us incredibly. I mean, if we're going to put residents in there, the issue around Manu Whenua, I think, is equally as important. And while they are residents, we can continue the subsets. To me, key stakeholders says it all. So given, is there any more discussion on this? I'll put to you, Council, the amendment A, as you read it. All those in favour, please say aye. If I could get you to hold your hands up, please, so we can. So that's Councillors Robson, Kitty, Granger and Morris, and all those against. It's myself, Councillors Baldock, Clout, Arbery and Salisbury. So this is not carried. Councillor Robson.
Yeah, I believe I'm able to under the current version of standing orders we use. And it picks up the point well made by Councillor Yako Arbery that we amend A to read and make explicit as follows. Agrees to engage with the developer community with regard to a refreshed direction, objectives and priorities for the city plan in partnership with key stakeholders to inform Council's 2131 long-term plan, because I think explicitly seems to be the purpose of the report. We only have P1 here. The only conversation we've heard is about engagement with developers. To avoid misrepresenting the essence of this report, I just think we should make that explicit. I don't know whether I have a second. Do I have a second? Thank you. I won't. I'll reserve if that's. Yeah, that's still possible. Thank you. To engage with the developer community with regards. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you. You're reserving. Councillor Arbery, did you want to speak to this?
No, I think I've spoken enough.
Give me Salisbury.
I would be happy to adopt that into A if you are.
As indeed I would be. Councillor Baldock.
Can I just ask the question whether developers is the right word or key stakeholders? Because we've already heard some opinions expressed about developers in the debate today, and I think it's broader than just developers, it's stakeholders that we're addressing. Are staff
Can I then
comfortable?
check, Councillor Robson, would you be happy to amend that, again, to have developer, community and key stakeholders?
I think key stakeholders is actually further down inside the same sentence. I don't see the need to repeat it.
Oh, it is too.
I
Thank you.
think the essence, I mean, I'm happy to speak. I decided not to reserve because I thought the point was made already by Councillor Yako Arbery about clearly what the intent of this report is and what the request is.
If is there any discussion on this, or can I put it to you? Same.
I'm good.
So if I could put this revised A to you as you see it there. Thank you, Robin.
Would it be A and B? Yeah. If it's been adopted. Back to the substantive. I'm sorry.
Great, thank you. Can I put, as you read it there, can I put that to you all in favour? Please say aye. Aye. Opposed?
No. We're talking about the substantive motion now?
Yes, we are.
Yeah. No to the substantive motion.
Sorry, no, I was actually putting the amendment in as revision.
The amendment's
We have
been
adopted that.
The amendment's been adopted.
Okay, all right.
So can we clear what we're...
Yep, all right, in that case, I will put the substantive motion to you. Can I just see a show of hands, please? All those in favour, please say aye. So, Salisbury, Arbery, Morris, Clout, Baldock, Granger, Kitty and myself, and opposed Councillor Robson, which leaves no room for abstentions. So the motion is carried. Thank you, Council. Council, we will move into public excluded and then we'll have a break for morning tea. So can I just thank you, and seconded please. Thank you, Kelvin. All those in favour please say aye. Against, carry.